There are a lot of people who want to color every issue as one of race or identity or harassment or feelings and things like that. And I would say that it's really muddied up the waters, not just in the United States, not just in politics, but in any sort of um, place where there's really arguments nowadays. I actually was at work today, not to beat around the bush, but I was at work today and I was at about a couple meetings. I was surprised how good the meetings were at focusing really just on the topics that are relevant. They never ever stray at the job I work at into any of the crap I talk about on this channel in terms of the Me Too movement or Mexico or Venezuela or Corbyn or any of this stuff. And I think it's good that there's still some places where you can get real focus on things that are kind of important to move the organization and probably society in general along better. It doesn't mean you should ignore totally what's going on in the rest of the world, but you can't make everything political. That's what kind of happened over the past couple months with Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn was basically being called an anti-Semite day in and day out, and I don't think that I wouldn't say that it's an allegation that is totally without merit. I'm not going to say that he doesn't strike me as somebody of almost like impossible. It's almost impossible to trust this person, given that he's supported not only terror groups and things like that in the Middle East, but also the IRA. The IRA guys, a person who's running to be potentially the next prime minister of Britain, has supported the IRA, a terrorist group. And some people would say, yes, the IRA is justified in liberating all of Ireland. That's your opinion, fine. He's running to be the prime minister of the country that the IRA used to bomb, and yet Corbyn continues to have this almost hypnotic hold on the average voter in much of Britain, especially the core Labour voter. People like to analogize him to Bernie Sanders, and I would say that in many respects he might even be more skilled than Bernie Sanders, because Jeremy Corbyn doesn't necessarily retreat on almost anything. He does have this will to stick to what he believes in, even if the things that he believes in are absolute nonsense. And I think at the same time that it's the most, I guess, admirable quality, it's also the most dangerous quality for somebody who's trying to be the prime minister of the country that has pretty much given birth to our society here in the U.S. as well as numerous other Western countries like Australia or Canada. The British people, in my opinion, should be afraid of the possibility of Jeremy Corbyn being their future leader. But there's really there's kind of an obstacle in that path, and that obstacle has to do with the divergence of Corbyn from the orthodoxy of the Labour Party over the past couple decades as far as the European Union. There have always been people within the Labour Party that said that the European Union is not a good idea. It disenfranchises people. It makes government unaccountable to the people. It actually makes it harder for the government of the British people to collect monies in order to provide public services for the people. And this is if you're somebody who is on the left. A lot of the people would argue that the money that the British spend on taxes to the European Union or other collections that the EU makes on Britain could be better spent on social programs for the British people. This is a left-wing argument among many people in that camp. It's not something that I believe. I would say that there's a lot of issues where there is commonality on the right and the left as far as why the EU is bad, but that is their position on why it's a horrible organization to be a part of, or alliance to be a part of. Of course, most people who oppose the EU, who are not on the left, would say that the reason that they do so is because of the rampant immigration that the EU has embraced as a policy for all of its countries, the multiculturalism, the disregard for the national heritage of those people. I'm not a fan of the French people or French culture, but I think that it's not up to bureaucrats in Brussels to determine the rules for societies, and they'll issue educational materials for French people. I would say that those things should be made those issues should be decided at the local level. It's the same principle I take as far as the United States. It's the same principle I would take as far as any of these countries, South America. I don't think the United States should be making decisions for Latin American countries. And I think it's that type of position that puts people like me not within any specific political camp, whether it's conservative or liberal or whatever party you want to call it. Although in the UK they have a party called UKIP that does advance that type of thinking, and I would say that across the world that's probably the political party that most summarizes my views. But this is Jeremy Corbyn himself in 1996 talking about what joining the EU and the euro would mean for British people.
We're here in the Floral Hall. We're listening to reaction of Robin Cook's speech from a number of Eurosceptics, or people who are not that happy with the way things have been going. Wait, Jeremy Corbyn, what's your problem with the way that Robin Cook is handling Europe?
My concern is that we need to be very robust against the conditions for the single currency. A single currency would lead to enormous cuts in public expenditure in Britain and a very rapid rise in unemployment. Now, he appeared to make some tilt in that direction. The other one is a concern about democracy in Europe. We have a European bureaucracy totally unaccountable to anybody. Powers have gone from national parliaments. They haven't gone to the European Parliament. They've gone to the Commission and to some extent to the Council of Ministers. These are quite serious matters.
People argue against there being a drop in public expenditure by saying that there will be economic growth to compensate.
Well, I've heard that argument before, but the reality is we have more poor in Europe per head than almost any other country. The number of people in real poverty is increasing, and the kind of cuts in public expenditure envisaged by the Maastricht criteria would lead to a massive increase in poverty and unemployment in Britain. You cannot wait for growth. You have to deal with the issue of poverty now.
All right, so that was him in 1996, and this is Jeremy Corbyn now.
Jeremy Corbyn, very striking moment in Conference Hall this morning when Keir Starmer said the option of Remain was open. Massive standing ovation. Can I check? Did he clear that statement with you?
The speech was, of course, discussed in advance, and what we said was that we'd put this motion to conference, which was agreed by 200 delegates from differing perspectives who wanted to, A, make the point that the 6 tests that we've laid down must be put to the government and the government held to account on them, and we would then consider all options.
But just to be clear, the explicit line, which actually wasn't in the version that he put out, that Remain is an option, you knew he was going to say that?
The speech was cleared, so yes, of course I knew.
Very good. And so it is, again, sorry to be slightly repetitive, but it is official policy that Remain is an option.
A speech isn't policy. A speech is a speech. The policy is the motion that's carried.
Yeah.
And the motion
and
does
the motion imply that Remain is on the table?
The motion says...
So let's take a look at, I think this is the part, well, this isn't the speech itself, but this is Keir Starmer on Bloomberg.
The Labour Party is preparing to vote down any deal with the EU that Theresa May brings to Parliament. Shadow Brexit Secretary Keir Starmer also says the option of Remain is not ruled out in the event of a second referendum. Keir Starmer joins us now from Labour's conference in Liverpool. Very good to have you with us, Keir, this morning. So you've said you'll vote against Theresa May. You've said you'll vote against her plans. How sure can you be that you'll have the numbers, that you'll be able to make that work? Where will the rebels outside the Labour Party come from?
Yeah, I mean, the position on the deal is, I think that everybody is now worried that we're going to get a very bad deal or even no deal. I set out a number of tests at the beginning of the exercise. I said these are the tests that we'll apply to whatever you bring back, Prime Minister, and if you don't meet them, we'll vote against it. Now, at the time, the Prime Minister said, I'm determined to meet your tests. But things have gone very wrong, and what we're indicating today is that she's not on course to meet our tests, and if she doesn't meet our tests, we're going to vote against any deal she brings back. Of course, there's still a prospect that she may not even reach agreement, which would be even worse. But we're making it clear that we set these tests, we set these conditions at the beginning of the exercise, and we're going to apply them to what comes back.
So if you vote against her deal, Keir, there's a risk that then we end up with no deal, of course. Are you prepared, is the Labour Party prepared to take that risk?
Well, I don't think that this idea that the Labour Party's got to vote for whatever the Theresa May cobbles together, or something worse, is the right way to look at it, because that's completely meaningless. To say to the opposition, well, you can have a vote, but if you don't vote for me, you're getting something much worse. That's not meaningful. So what we've said is, if the deal is voted down, or she doesn't reach a deal, there ought to be a general election, because it would be a complete breakdown and failure of the negotiating strategy. And in an ordinary world, that would happen. These are, after all, the most important negotiations since the Second World War, and if you've failed in them, you ought to go. But if that doesn't happen, there must be other options, because we shouldn't go to no deal, because that would be catastrophic. And what we say is other options must be open, and one of those is a public vote. So it's a sequenced, structured.
So essentially what's going on here is that, and maybe we'll play a little more of Corbyn. You know what? Probably not, because there's too much time on this anyway. But here's the issue, and I think I'm going to talk until we're finished. So the Labour Party has kind of an internal civil war. You have, of course, the traditional Labour voter. Let's bring up the map from the Brexit map. So I guess we'll look at the BBC version. I hope there's no ad on it. No. Just go to Wikipedia. Damn it. Okay, so there was a clear concentration of Leave voters in this area. If you're looking at my cursor, here I'll just zoom in. This area, which is the Leave vote, you see the dark blue, is the area where the Labour heartland is, the traditional Labour heartland. And what does that mean? Those are people who are, actual organized labor, the factory towns of the northeast of England. I'm not going to claim that I'm an expert on, I think Manchester is up there. I'm not an expert on British geography. I know Liverpool is somewhere over here, somewhere. And then you have Kent down there somewhere. So, and then along the coast, the Labour vote during that election in 2016 was very divided, because those traditional areas did vote to leave the European Union. They're mostly people who have seen kind of their sovereignty leach away, and the economic benefits don't reach Middle England, the people that actually built the country, or their parents built the country. They don't feel the real yield of belonging to this massive, unresponsive body of bureaucrats that are in Belgium, which you can see kind of here, that really don't give a shit what they think. So what happened? That Labour is divided. Well, the other element of the party is the element that has kept Jeremy Corbyn the strongest. Okay, these are the people that really joined the party and have sustained him, and they've remained true believers in him because of what he believes in terms of, for the many, not the few, and a kinder and a different kind of politics. I think he said, I think it was either a kinder, gentler politics or something like that. Jeremy Corbyn campaigned against the austerity of the David Cameron years. What David Cameron did was, in response to the deficits run by the Tony Blair and Gordon Brown governments, he cut budgets to a significant degree. Although Blair and Brown, let's be honest, also they were considered very neoliberal. They didn't support the massive social spending policies that Corbyn would support, that the traditional Labour Party would support. They were what was called in the 90s New Labour. New Labour essentially meant, enough with these massive strikes, enough with all that. It was basically Bill Clinton, but the UK version. That was what Tony Blair promoted when he was Prime Minister of Britain. And Tony Blair won a lot of votes that way. Because, yes, that was the vision of Britain post-Cold War. That was the vision of a country that was kind of living in there was an economic boon of the time. Of course, you have to hand a couple of things to Tony Blair, a couple accomplishments, which was his handling of the economy during that, period of 1997 through the mid-2000s. He did very well. And signing the Good Friday Agreement with the Irish, thanks in part to Bill Clinton. So here, I'm trying to be objective here. I'm trying to give credit where credit is due. And Bill Clinton and Tony Blair accomplished something that, to this day, has helped the people of Ireland, the Good Friday Agreement. And after that, they pretty much fucked everything up because, Blair brought the British into the Iraq War. And then since then, the traditional Labour voter they don't trust the Blair wing of the party. They believe they lied in order to get the country in order to join the U.S. in the invasion of Iraq. They don't believe that any facet of the war was justified. And I have to say, I agree with their perception that it was not necessary to invade Iraq. And that's what brought Jeremy Corbyn to the front benches of Labour. That's what brought this guy, Jeremy Corbyn, who for most of his career was a backbencher. Backbencher in politics are those people who don't get to be cabinet members. They don't get to head committees in the parliaments where committees do exist. I think in Britain the committee isn't as big of a deal as here, but I could be wrong. Jeremy Corbyn, what earned him his spot at the top of Labour was this disillusionment with the politics of constant backbiting and lying and saying one thing and meaning another thing that the Labour Party had become under Blair and Brown. So in 2015, after Labour fell apart in another election, they basically let the Conservatives seize control with a complete majority, which ended up allowing Brexit to happen afterward. The party base, they started to unite around this person, Jeremy Corbyn, who did bring a little more of a genuine personality at the time to the party. Now, since then, there have been a lot of things said that are true, but they're not relevant to this point about Corbyn and his relationships with Iran and with terror groups and whatever. That all of that is a relevant issue to his general leadership. What we're talking about here is the issue of what does Corbyn's position on the EU mean? Because the people who elected Jeremy Corbyn, the head of the Labour Party, are generally people like the person who wrote this article, similar to him, not entirely. It said, could Corbyn solve Brexit and save Britain? I can almost imagine it now. As Jeremy Corbyn gazed over the 2018 Labour conference on Wednesday, after the most confident and relaxed speech of his time as leader, he will have seen an energized party about which two apparently incompatible generalizations can be made. The first is that 3 years into Corbyn's revolution, Labour has now been radically transformed into a party in the leader's own far-left political image. The second is that Labour's many factions, interest groups, and traditions are nevertheless mostly managing to work together in a surprisingly pragmatic way. There was evidence for each of these claims in Corbyn's speech. The left radicalism was there in the attacks on privatization and outsourcing, the racket on which a Corbyn government would call time. It was there in the enormous list of uncosted government spending commitments, which covered housing, police, childcare, public sector pay, universal benefits for older people, and investment in transport and labor and green energy. And it was there in the well-trailed section denouncing the political and economic elite, by implication, New Labour as well as Conservative, that kept the banking system afloat after the financial crisis a decade ago. But the practical pluralism that allows Labour's differing interest groups to all leave Liverpool in something like good order was there in the speech too. Labour was a broad church, Corbyn acknowledged, invoking an idea that many thought had now gone. The party achieved nothing by being divided, he insisted, so it should not seek out division. It had to draw a line, easier said than done, but said nevertheless under the bitterness around anti-Semitism over the summer. Instead, Labour embodied the new common sense of our time. It was the new majority. These are mere phrases, yet many observers of the Liverpool conference will recognize that they chimed with something real in a successful week for Labour. As Corbyn delivered his leader's speech, the historian David Cogan was highlighting not just the unimaginable shift in Labour policy stances since the Blair-Brown era, but also the spirit of give and take that ran through many of the proceedings, not least in the handling of the Brexit and then the relationship between trade unions, blah, blah, blah. Let me see here. Two separate sections on Tuesday on the conference floor embody this dynamic complexity. In the first, the shadow Brexit secretary, Keir Starmer, electrified the conference by saying that nobody is ruling out Remain as an option. The standing ovation that greeted the comment took even him by surprise. The issue dominated the news cycle, and every nuance of Corbyn's speech regarding Brexit was put under the microscope to see if it aligned. They did, sort of. In the same hall on Tuesday afternoon, the delegate from Harlow, Colin Monaghan, moved a motion on Palestine in a fiery speech. He too brought the hall to its speech. He too stirred strong, prolonged cheering and chanting. All of a sudden, there were more flags being waved in the Labour conference on Tuesday than they have in the Albert Hall on the last night of the proms. It was hard to tell which was the largest outburst. The lazy thing to say is that the part of the conference that gave Starmer a standing ovation in the morning was the Labour right, while the part that waved the Palestinian flags was the left. There's some truth in that, of course. And Labour moderates are passionate pro-Europeans, while the Labour left has always seen Europe as the rights issue. By the same token, the Palestinian cause has always been principally that of the left, while the Labour right has been more pro-Israeli. So I will say this, okay? I would say that the Palestinian cause is, Labour can support whatever it wants to. I mean, it's not as if they need me as somebody to judge their policies, but this is the message I'm seeing. Okay, they would rather support a cause that nullifies the vote of the average British citizen, which was the Brexit vote. They did vote, whether you like it or not, to leave the EU. The EU, as you should by now recognize, is a body that limits free speech. It limits freedom of commerce. It limits basic, citizens' rights. It's almost as if they create subjects that are, just peons to their bullshit rules. That's really what the EU is. So they're willing to support that and negate the actual democratic vote by majority of the British people, which was an astonishing turnout, by the way. I believe it was over 80%. So that is what they would support. And at the same time, they come out fully in favor of a cause, the Palestinian cause, which is not exactly relevant to the British voter. This is something that I argue all the time to pro-Israel people, who always talk about the Republican Party. You should support the Republicans because they stand with Israel. I say the average person in the backwoods of Kentucky, the average person living somewhere in Washington State or wherever, they might have a superficial opinion on the Middle East. That's not really what drives them to go out and vote. In fact, it's kind of a distraction, to be honest with you. People should vote based on what's best for their community. what's best for the people that they're raising, their children at home, or the senior citizens that they have to take care of if they have parents or whatever. You can't bring in issues, and it's wrong when it's focused on anything that whether it's the Israel-Palestine issue or many other similar issues. I recognize that there's a lot of Cuban Americans that might think, oh, it's very important that people remain steadfast in opposing the Cuban regime. It is, but it's not a major electoral issue. And that's really how you can distract voters. And I think that people who are British should recognize, look beyond all the other issues with Corbyn, or maybe include them if those are important to you. But the basic flaw in this person, the basic thing that undermines his credibility before anybody around the world, should be the fact that he has always, when he was a backbencher, he talked about how abusive the EU is. And now he's basically waving off the actual vote of the people that he wants to be elected to represent by democratic vote in a referendum. He wants to wave it off because he wants peace within the party. That's not really a politician with courage anymore. He might have had courage before. I've never thought he does. He had brains, but now I don't think he has courage either. That's about it. Please like the video, subscribe to the video, see my live stream later at 11 Eastern time. And you can comment below and subscribe to the other channel, Razor Ray Live Wounds. And I'll talk to you guys later. Have a great Friday.